it's because they are the trendsetters. They have the responsibility to raise awareness. We heard so many artists say that they started driving hybrid cars. But at the same time, here we should differentiate between what is hype and noise and actually what people are really doing about it. For example, many artists were ridiculed on stand-up comedies and Saturday Night Live because on one hand they say they're driving a hybrid car and the second day they take their private jet. So we have to realize who is really doing something about those issues. Now, has this awareness reached us? First of all, the Arab businesses, have they become global or haven't they? Lately, in the past year, there has rarely been a time where we didn't hear the names of our Arab companies discussed on business news bulletins on international networks, either doing acquisitions or saving financial institutions who went under because of the subprime. So we can say that a number of them have become global. Yet, have they assumed their responsibilities, their civic duties, to engage as global corporate citizens? And how does that affect the bottom line? At the end of the day, the business of a company is to do business. This is what we're going to discuss in this panel. And to do that, today we have a distinguished panel. Let me start by introducing them in the order in which they are seated. We have with us Mr. Arif Naqvi, the founder and group CEO of Abraj Capital based in the UAE. Abraj is one of the very few private equity firms, according to them, working to put in place a sustainability program. They are working on 3 levels: corporate governance. On the social level, they're doing a lot of work in the education area and in communities they're working with Injaz. And on the environmental level, by limiting paper and water usage in their firms and in the companies they own. We have also with us Mr. Nabil Isdal, Chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company in the USA, and he is also the co-chair of the WEF on Africa. Mr. Isdal can share with us some partnerships they're doing in the Arab world, especially in water management, which is aligned with their main business, with what they do. Also with us, we have today Prime Minister Dr. Ahmed Nazif. Of course, he's the Prime Minister of Egypt. He's going to tell us also of a few initiatives that the public sector is doing with the private sector in Egypt. We have with us also Mr. Robert Zulik, the President of the World Bank Group in the USA. Mr. Zulik launched the Arab World Initiative, which is a new strategy for the World Bank engagement in the Arab region. It aims at forging the partnerships that I was talking about between the public and the private sector to sponsor humanitarian and environmental programs. We have Mr. Fadi Ghandour, founder and CEO of Aramex International in Jordan. I want to point out here that Aramex is the first company in the Arab world that issued a sustainability report. We're going to ask him about that, and he's very actively involved, especially in the education area. And last but not least, we have with us Mr. Mohammed Alshaya, the executive chairman of Alshaya Group in Kuwait. Alshaya Group is especially concerned with the need for job creation in the Middle East. I believe you spoke about that yesterday, Mr. Alshaya. They are engaging in entrepreneurship and career building programs for the youth. Welcome, and let us start first with Mr. Nabil Isdal. Of course, we spoke about the partnerships that you're doing in this part of the world. I would like to know more from you about those partnerships. And do you think that the Arab businesses are engaging as much as they should?
Well, I think the short answer to the second question is are they engaging? Yes. Are any of us engaging to the level that maybe we're now expected to? And the answer to that is probably no. I'd rather put this in an opening comment in a frame. I think we've seen a societal change. I think you heard President Mubarak talk about it yesterday in terms of his view that business and government have to be partners in terms not just of economic development, but in terms of social development. And if you go back to the last century, really business was seen really as the Friedman model in terms of the only responsibility of business was to make a profit for its share owners. That's why I talk about societal change. And now we have a really, I think, a common understanding that governments can't do it alone, businesses can't do it alone, and actually NGOs can't do it alone. And now that we have this awareness, you're talking about awareness, the magazine that you showed is all about awareness. Now we're all trying to work on this new model. And Klaus Schwab looked at the 5, the different levels, moving from philanthropy all the way to global corporate citizenship. that are sort of the new developmental areas for business in terms of this engagement. And I think we're all working our way through how that operates. To come back to the Arab world itself, I think there are global issues, but I also think there are issues which are country and region specific. So you can't look at one global issue and judge a society in terms of how far along it is on the environment, for example, if there are other more pressing issues which require the focus of that society and obviously of the triangle that I'm talking about of governments, of civil society, NGOs, and of business. And I think that's the frame that we're working in. I think that's what we want to talk about today in terms of how we move that ahead, because unless we do that effectively, the legitimacy of our economic model, the support that we get, the societal support, the support for globalization is going to founder, and therefore our ability to create the economic growth which really does bring people out of poverty is going to be jeopardized. So that's the frame that I'd like to sort of start the discussion with and open up my comments with.
We're going to go over that further, but let's hear the opening remarks from everybody. I move on to Mr. Fadi Ghandour. I mentioned that you are the first company in the Middle East to issue a sustainability report. Can you explain, first of all, the idea of the sustainability report and why you're doing it, in addition to your initiatives?
Sustainability reporting and sustainability management, let's say, forget reporting, because reporting is just saying what you are actually doing. Sustainability management is, at the end of the day, looking at the corporation beyond what you mentioned in your opening statement by saying the business of business is business. And sustainability management is saying the business of business is not only business, it's not only shareholder value. It goes beyond into the stakeholder value, into a wider look on the community and the business and all the stakeholders that we influence and touch. And businesses, whether we like it or not, whether businesses like it or not, are in society. They influence society. They are polluters. They influence education. They hire people. They're job creators. They're engines of growth. If we don't think beyond shareholder value, and if we think that the business of business is only business, then we are missing on a very important aspect on how we should view the returns of corporations. So there is a social return, not only a financial return, that we have to look at. And the social return is saying basically that businesses have to invest in the societies that they are in. Invest is the key word here. It's not CSR. It is not a PR job. It is an investment in the society that we're in. Meaning, if we invest in education, then business has a return because we are hiring these people. If we act responsibly towards the environment, and we are polluters, after all, many businesses are polluters. I'm certainly in a business that is a massive polluter, which is the logistics business. If we are not going to act responsibly, so who is going to pay the cost of ruining the environment? Do businesses pay for it or not? So is there a return when we invest in making sure that we are clean in the way we act on the ground? So that is the story of sustainability. The story is beyond the narrow view of profitability into the social returns and the stakeholder view and everybody we touch as we do our business.
That's so good, but why haven't Arab businesses done more about that so far?
Well, because there is very little democratization in the Arab business world. Because corporations in the Arab world are mostly private. There is no public pressure yet. As we go public, the corporations are being democratized, which means our shareholders, our clients are influencing us. That's when we have to act responsibly, because again, when we pollute, we're polluting our clients. When we are investing in education, we're investing in the education of our clients at the end of the day also. So as we go public, we are much more accountable and much more responsible towards the community and towards the environment that we live in.
Mr. Mohammed Alshaya, we in the Arab world, we have a history of philanthropy. It comes within our culture, within our religion, the Islam. So you have pushed that further. You have pushed that into engagement in programs. I know you are active on career building, as I mentioned, taking in students to work for you, to train perhaps. What made you go that step further? And you are not a public company.
Yes, we are not a public company, private company. And the industry we are in is not very attractive to talented students to join. It's basic job of retail, serving customers, especially in the Gulf. We have very little of people joining. So we have to try to do programs to involve them during, for example, summer. So just recently we have initiated Ishhan Taqatik, Charge Your Energy, in Kuwait, with 1,000 students, boys and girls, to come and join us during the summer and train in our stores. We try to expose them for this kind of work during the summer, and hopefully we will be able to then have them come back every summer, if possible, or join us for a career. This is one initiative. Another initiative is we are blessed of relationships with iconic brands in the world, in the business of retail or hospitality, coffee like Starbucks coffee, Starwood, Sheraton. They have a program of encouraging guests not to leave the bed sheets without a mark on it. If they say you don't need to wash it again, just it's okay, or hang the towel. And this will, how many thousands of hotels around the world using detergent, and this will help. Starbucks the same.
For the management of resources,
exactly.
The better management of resources.
With their social initiatives, H&M, the Swedish company, with women, for example, and yesterday I just mentioned that we are embarking on recruiting and retaining women to work for us in Saudi Arabia in a special model with H&M. We are engaged as a company, as a family, also with Mentor International, which is very much about preventing kids in schools from to be exposed into drugs. So we are, I would say, not that late, but running fast in making things happen and try to bring in some feel of responsibility toward the society.
Mr. Robert Zulik, you heard now what some companies are doing in this part of the world. Are you satisfied? Do you think they're doing enough?
Well, it's interesting, as we launched this Arab World Initiative that you mentioned, we did a lot of consultation in the region to try to get a sense of what people felt were the priorities. And one came up with topics such as not just getting children to schools, but the quality of education, getting the connection between education and work, inclusive societies, women, minorities, those that have been kept out. Improvement of governance at the public level to have more effectiveness, efficiency, so people know that government services are well done, but also at the private level. Natural resource, water. Now, what's intriguing about this is that as we did these consultations, we started to get the sense that the private sector in the region is increasingly the driver of these items. And I think this is some moment of change, as Neville mentioned, in that traditionally the role of the state was really supreme here. And frankly, many of the companies...
Was?
Well, I think it is changing, and I'll come to that. And I think that many of the companies fit within the frameworks. In some ways, we're beneficiaries of that. As states are opening up and creating more opportunities, you start to see more companies start to take on these issues. And I think one of the questions that now some firms are struggling with is that many of them do have a tradition of privacy and even in some ways secrecy. They often did things for their communities, but very much behind the scenes. And we're now at a stage where it's starting to become not only more acceptable, but encouraged to recognize how a company can set a standard and even push the governments. So one of the things that we're trying to do across the bank group is be catalytic and draw in some experience from around the world. So it may be the role that businesses can play with schools and education. It may be some of the corporate social reporting, how this is done. It may be governance. But there are other areas, for example, in some ways it can help both a company and a country's brand. We worked in Jordan with the International Labor Organization to try to improve the standards of conditions in some of the apparel plants. Companies start to see it's in their own interest in terms of health and safety standards. But it also, frankly, helps develop the brand of the product. And consumers, the type of people that read those glossy magazines that you were just held up as an environmental example, are often interested in what's going on. So whether it be finance with the Equator Principles, whether it be production, whether it be the environmental aspects of energy producers, I honestly think what you're seeing in the region is more and more executives and family-owned operations saying that they know they want to move on this front. And frankly, I think one of the challenges in this aspect, just as the other work we do, is how do we connect players in the Arab world to do this? How do they do their own benchmarking? How do they see their own interconnections? And so I'm actually, coming back to your question about is it enough, there's always more to do, but I think it's an interesting moment where family operations and private business aren't just relying on the government. And frankly, progressive governments like the one the Prime Minister is leading is trying to encourage them to step forward.
Great. Let's move on to Mr. Naqvi. Also, you as a private equity firm, I understand that you are working on different levels, the community level, on education. Why?
I think,
why? And do you see that others are doing the same? Do you see that very few companies are doing anything about it?
Well, I think the title of your session, Do Arab Businesses Care, was provocative enough to answer that question in a sense. I think Arab businesses do care. And I think that there's a lot being done in the Arab world, but not enough is being done to pull it all together. Now, I think we've witnessed in the last few years a sea change in the way the private sector is viewed actually by government. Because up until now we had a situation where we had overwhelmingly preponderant governments that basically were involved in every aspect of state. And in the course of the last 10 years, as the business sector has become more resurgent and has begun to assert itself, we've also seen in many countries governments being led by very, very progressive people, and the business sector has become more and more involved with government. And as this has happened, what we've seen as the private sector is that they want to do things, but they can't do enough. Okay? There are many pressing priorities, and there are many sectors in which government is involved. So a number of businesses have stepped forward, and I think that's largely driven by the fact that big business has traditionally worked with government, and I see it happening a lot in countries such as Jordan, the UAE, Egypt as well, and the role of the role model has become very prominent. Now, when you look at private equity as a life form, the very interesting thing about our industry is that we're fairly sector agnostic, and we invest across industries, countries, and regions. And so when you think about the impact that private equity can make, not just in wealth creation, because investors make a lot of money, and as Fadi was saying earlier, the role of the shareholder, which has always been at the fore, is now being replaced by the role of the stakeholder. And what we found was that by insisting on and actually living the reality that business is not just about the economic gain that is generated, but we need to look at the social gain, we need to look at the environmental gain, pull it all together and create sustainable value for the stakeholders in businesses. When you do that in private equity, you're investing in 50 or 60 companies. And the great thing is, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about it later, is that private equity can actually act as a virus in terms of infecting the companies that they invest in. And once they sell, they've left them with that virus, if you like, to self-replicate itself. So the ability to make a lasting impact is very, very high.
Dr. Nazif, the issue of government has come up several times now in the discussion. The businesses need the government's backing to do something. What has been the role of the government in Egypt? And do you think that, I'll ask you the same question, are you satisfied with what businesses are doing so far? Where can you see room for improvement?
Well, let me just start by saying that if we start focusing on the Middle East specifically and talk about corporate social responsibility, we need to realize that, and I think I agree with Bob very much in what he said, we are changing. The roles are changing. We are a region that is in a transition in many ways. Economically speaking, the roles are changing. The governments used to be doing most of all the economic activities in a country. That is now being released to the private sector as governments open up their systems, turn into an open market economy. But at the same time, most of the countries in the Middle East has a lot of social development to take place. So when you talk about social responsibility, the definition will have to change a little bit. It's not just about taking care of the environment, it's actually taking care of the whole society in many ways. And then the role comes out, whether that should be the government's responsibility alone or whether the private businesses have to be engaged in this. And the answer is obvious. No government alone can take care of the whole package. And I think the encouraging sign is that we're seeing the private sector, the businesses in the Arab world today, becoming more engaged on their own. And I can tell you, in the last few months, I've been approached as government by many of our business entities, whether they're multinationals working in Egypt or even small companies, with ideas about how can we help. Now, I would say that we haven't structured that yet in an integrated way. But I would also say that there's so many programs that have been taking place on different levels that are very encouraging in nature. If I can tell you, for example, that people are now talking about a partnership. They have a stake. I think businesses feel that reforming governments need that partnership from business. Because if they don't succeed on the social side, then they will lose also their positions in building their businesses. So I think this is an important concept, the partnership in development concept. And I can see it in many ways, even not just at the level of implementing social programs, even at the design level of those programs. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The First Lady in Egypt, Mrs. Suzanne Mubarak, is sponsoring a program to renovate schools, old schools in Egypt. We have so many of them and we need to do something about them.
You're in demand, Mr. Prime Minister.
Yeah. I shouldn't be the one to... this was an effort, mostly by the NGOs, in which business chipped in. And government came in, of course, with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of IT, to put in computers in schools and do things like that. So it was an integrated effort by three levels, an excellent one, and it had a very strong societal effect because it was targeting the low-income groups in certain areas. We can see this happen individually by companies today in many areas, whether it's geographically targeted or whether it is on a national level. The important thing is that the scope is widening. It is not just talking about good corporate citizenship in terms of behaving well with the environment or taking care, of their inputs.
So you are focusing more on the social issues. You think there's a priority in this part of the world on the social issues?
I believe so, because if you look at it, as we've transformed our societies, there are those who are deprived. There is those who say that reform always favors the rich, favors the business over those who don't have. And it is very important for businesses to send that signal that they are partners in that development, that they are keen to make sure, and it's good for business because look at, for example, the examples being given about the human resource side. Businesses need those skills. They need to help governments in building those skills, whether it by improving education or through training or even illiteracy alleviation. So there's so many factors that are involved that business themselves benefit from as they go to become good corporate citizens.
You mentioned a point that I would want to continue the discussion on. What is the benefit for the businesses? I have a question. I mean, now when you are running a company, when you are doing very well, you are growing your company, what makes you take that step to set up a department and incur costs to do additional work? Whether it is, let's call it a sustainability management, whether it is social, whether it is cultural. What makes you take that step? As the CEO, you have an obligation to deliver on the short term, to deliver results on the short term. Mr. Isdal, what made you take the first step to do something about it? Was it pressure from the public, pressure from any side? And how did you do the equation of foregoing short-term profits for the long term?
Well, obviously, I have to be able to face the share owners and convince them that the expenditure of the funds that we use around the sustainability issues that we're involved in are good for the long term. And I would argue that whilst there's a short-term need, that we are hired as managers to look at the long term. And if we don't do that, we don't build sustainable businesses. Let me talk about this sustainability in another way. In a granular way, unless we have sustainable communities, and we're operating in sustainable communities, we don't have a sustainable business. So that's, that's how we operate. We operate in 200 countries around the world. So we have to, and we manufacture in those countries, so we have to be locally involved. But the other thing, I think, as we move, along this hierarchy, I talk about, Klaus Schwab's definition, moving from governance to philanthropy to corporate social responsibility. He talks about entrepreneurship and then corporate global citizenship. I think when you're a public company, you have to be sure that there are so many areas you can be involved in. You have to believe that it has to be not just my personal favorite project. It is linked to the business. It's linked to the footprint that we make. That's why, as a global issue, we take water. Why? It's natural that we should be involved.
Because you add value in that area, but...
And that's where we talk about a footprint. That's where we have a footprint. So we look after that footprint. And then it is very clear that we have an involvement in that area, we have a responsibility in that area, and therefore applying the funds of the business to address the issues in that area is in the interests of the long-term shareholders of the business. And that line, I call it line of sight. That line of sight is very important. Is different from philanthropy. Philanthropy can be something that's not connected with the business. Something that, and when it's your own ownership, I have my own philanthropy. I've got my own foundation. I fund things that interest me. But if you're running a public company, they have to be linked to the business you're in and the footprint that you make. And then you can justify it 110%.
It makes me think also, for example, in your business, you are perhaps in an industry whereby some might criticize the industry as being not very environmentally friendly. Fadi, you were talking about you are in the business of delivering packages, which means also you are in a business that involves pollution. Mr. Alshaya, you say that your business is not very attractive to get people into it. So you have also an agenda in doing this to get people to be interested in your business, and also when you are a company that has a social history and social responsibility, you can attract good talent in people. So isn't it all about another agenda at the end of the day, Fadi?
That's a very good question. I think in today's world, talent chooses where it goes. So if we're not responsible companies, we're not going to be attracting talent, believe me. The new generation that is coming out in today's world, my son's age, which is 22 years old, he's not going to be interested in coming to work for a company that is environmentally unfriendly. Believe me, they are so aware of these issues.
But is it because you are socially responsible?
It's a beauty contest out there. We have to look so good because we're competing. The biggest challenge in today's world, the biggest challenge in today's world for corporations, whether local or multinational, is how do we attract talent? How do we retain that talent? And the corporate culture of the organization is the single most important aspect beyond feeling that you are coming in and making money and achieving your ambitions in that organization. And if you come and work in a company that is not managed in a way that you are going to feel as a citizen, that as a citizen you're making a difference, they're going to go and they're going to move globally, because talent is global, it's mobile, it is no longer within boundaries of geography.
But what if you are not socially responsible because you want to be good, you want to do good, because you want to improve the brand of your company? No, because there is the term greenwashing, for example, you focus on the positive aspects and you hide the negative side of the business.
No, you can't hide. Look, hiding is eventually something that's going to be discovered. So no hiding here. This is cheating, basically. If you're going to be a polluter and say, no, we're not a polluter, you can't be, you're either a polluter or not a polluter at the end of the day. So that challenge is very essential. And I would just like to add a couple of things that we heard from the Prime Minister just a minute earlier. The social needs is extremely essential, obviously, education and investing, because there is a political pressure to deliver for people on the ground now, food, jobs, etc., etc. But are we calculating the cost of what is happening to the environment when we are ruining it, and who is paying for it in terms of hospital costs, and the next generation that is going to be paying for that 10, 15 years down the road? Are we going to think today? And that is a paradox. I'm not saying there is an answer, but that's a paradox. And environment is ruining the environment is extremely costly.
Mr. Zulik, do you have a comment?
I think what you're touching on here is you have a continuum. The start is that even for firms that don't have high educated workers, most people are discovering that health and safety of your workforce and morale of your workforce requires you to treat people as an important resource. So that's one level. The second level is, as you start to move towards higher talent pools, a image of a firm and its overall social responsibility does become part of a draw. You were then also trying to go to the brand aspects and consumers, and so how they perceive a company. That's another aspect. But there's another dimension, which is that this can be important for the efficiency of your company. And ultimately, and this is where it back intersects with government, where if businesses work with government to try to encourage the right rules, you can be on the cutting edge of new business areas. So, for example, in this region, it's often hard to get some wood products for building, and people are now starting to look at green building codes for energy efficiency. Why would you waste more energy given the price of oil if you didn't have to? In this region in particular, the price of water is eventually, depending on how governments manage it, going to be something that you're going to have to deal with tariffs in a different structure. So if a company can be ahead, so what people do in hotels is not only good for the environment, but frankly, it lowers the costs of all the inputs that they would otherwise have to do for cleaning the product. So you have interconnections here. And at least what I've been able to see is that people are increasingly aware of these, and a lot of it is the interchange within the industry itself. And that's where I do think this region is starting to move beyond, frankly, a lot of the secrecy to trying to share and exchange the ideas. And one of the important things is to have businesses do this themselves. So it doesn't have to be ordered by the government or directed by the government. But actually where the interconnection can help is now and then businesses can go to the government and they can start to say, look, we can see we're going to have a resource problem in this area or that area, or we're going to have a problem in terms of emissions, whether with climate change or for other purposes. Can we work with government to have some effective regulation of this, as opposed to just an overreaction that sometimes is driven by public frustration? And that's the last part. I think smart businesses anticipate. Smart businesses look ahead and try to have a sense of where the marketplace is going with public policy. And frankly, they try to position themselves to be leaders as a business matter and as a policy regulatory matter.
Some of them want to do something, but they don't know where to start. What is the role of the World Bank, for example, here? You launched an initiative last year, but did you translate it into on-the-ground help or direction or awareness, probably? How did you translate it on the ground?
Well, in this field, as in development in general, it only works if you have local ownership. So what we try to do is find partners, whether private sector or government, and then we try to create councils, best practices, share information. Now, we're also an investor, so IFC is an investor, so we try to encourage, for example, the financial institutions that we invest in to adopt the Equator Principles. We try to talk with governments about, Prime Minister and I yesterday were talking about the EITI, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which has various reportings for governments. But where we also find innovative partners, as I mentioned, as the case with Jordan with the ILO labor standards, or in the case of Dubai with some of the green building codes, we can show in practical terms how this can be done. Now, frankly, one of the issues that I think we're going to have to spend more time in the region is this water resource issue. I mean, it is going to be absolutely critical. And so this is where it comes back into the governments. How is water used for agriculture, for irrigation? There's ways you can do this much more efficiently. So again, as people realize that these resources are finite, what we can do is share best practices and information from around the world, find partners, create demonstrations, but then to really make this work, it's got to be organizations like this or others so that businesses take it up themselves.
Dr. Nazif, I'm going to ask you a sensitive question, but I think you will answer me. They mentioned the partnership with the government. In our part of the world, the governments are just too big. If any initiative is there, the government has to be there. The government actually does it. So, and in some parts of the world, if a company grows big and starts to do like things on the social level, they start saying that this is political money. Probably the CEO wants to be in parliament later on, and he's doing that for political reasons. Does the government let the companies act in the way they would like to act in this part of the world?
Well,
I'm talking about the Arab world in general.
You see, it's, as I said, we are in transition. I'm not saying that it's happening all the way yet, but at the end of the day, this is a partnership. And you can allow your partner to do a lot of things, and in fact, you should. I believe that, what we've been talking about is really different hats given to different entities, whether it's government or business in this case. But they can interchange those hats easily. We should surpass the idea of just businesses playing the role of the benevolent actor, in a sense, and go into other roles. And I would suggest 3 other roles. One is the partnership in development that I was mentioning, and it's very important that that be seen clearly by the whole society.
But excuse me, if they do a program and they engage in a community, they become heroes in that community.
Well, that's very good, and I think it is becoming more acceptable today. I mentioned the idea of the schools, but there are many others that are taking place here in Egypt in which the government has been very supportive. We have food banks, for example, taken up by some of the large corporations in Egypt, and they're working very nicely, and they are being supported today by the government. So that kind of thing is very important. But the other role that they can play is being just a good neighbor in many ways. And I'll give you one good example where we are here in Sharm el-Sheikh. All the businesses here in Sharm el-Sheikh, whether they're hotels or, small shops or whatever, have a stake in the environment here. I mean, if the coral reefs get damaged in any way, their business will be affected definitely. So they have a stake there. And we're starting today some programs, environmental programs here in which the businesses are really taking the lead. I'll give you an example. The governor of South Sinai took a decision to ban plastic bags simply because they're ruining the sea and the desert.
That doesn't make him a hero. I'm talking about social programs.
But you need the response from the businesses. You need them to chip in. If they don't cooperate, if they don't take the initiatives on their own, now they have done something different, and they took the initiative there. They're forming a company for the solid waste management of Sharm el-Sheikh. Now that traditionally is something that the government would be doing. They're taking the lead in there. So you're seeing the changes taking place. The last role I want to mention here, and I agree a lot with what has been mentioned, is the role of business as a mentor. And what I mean by a mentor here is that they have an area of expertise, and they need to transfer that expertise to whether it's to their own employees, whether it is to others, skill development in their same area, or even whether, because you look at big businesses, small businesses come out of big businesses, so they can spin off even some of those businesses. This is a very important role as well, playing the mentor in their areas of expertise.
Yes, Mr. Shaya.
I just want to add to His Excellency about establishing or encouraging small business. We as growing business and diversifying, we're embarking into building supermarkets starting in Kuwait and Doha, Qatar. But the vendors, the suppliers, would like to encourage. This is an association with the American gourmet company Dean and DeLuca from the US. And we are there with an agenda to really encourage women to supply us with cooked food. and they would become vendors of local food every day, and they will make money from it for them and grow their business in future. Maybe will grow with us in other markets if it's possible. This
That
one.
falls under social entrepreneurship. Where
Yes,
you
but also
encourage
it is
people and
for
make money out of it.
women. We're not
For
saying men, we're doing it for women. Another thing I want to really address an issue that hasn't been raised. Why the Middle East has the highest birth rate in the world? It's a big issue. And we have, as a private sector with government, to address it, because we have to look for the quality, not the quantity. We have to push the education, invest in training, and try, and education would reflect into lower birth rate. Because we at the moment of time, we have to, we cannot sustain the growth of population, and we have to make sure we are able to provide jobs for all these millions coming in the coming years in the Arab world. So this is a very important issue. No, I haven't heard it in any of the sessions or as an issue.
Mr. Zulik, just a second. Mr. Isdal has a comment also.
Yeah, I don't want to duck the issue that you threw out earlier about the provocation, about greenwashing, about hiding. I think those days are gone, and I think there's a good reason for that. We all, the major public companies, actually publish reports now, along with annual reports with metrics. But also there's another aspect that I want to touch on, and that is the involvement of NGOs. And the NGOs, effectively, as you sit with them now, they say, look, you know, in terms of the environmental issues, we've made the case. Now what do we do about it? And what's happening now is a level of engagement where businesses are working with the NGOs towards solutions. That's why I talk about the triangle. For example, next week I'm going to be the keynote speaker at a Greenpeace meeting in Beijing. 10 years ago, you would never have imagined that linkage between Greenpeace and business. And because we are working together, we've got projects with them that we're working on, specific projects. We don't agree on everything. That's true. We have a very strong linkage with USAID, but also with CARE, with the World Wildlife Fund. We use the World Wildlife Fund in terms of commitments we make on water. I'm in a session later, we'll talk about that in more detail. But we have commitments there, and they monitor us. So we're actually working with NGOs so that what we're doing is absolutely legitimized. And then the final point I just want to echo. I get emails now from our own people about how they feel about our engagement. Because they in their day-to-day lives are engaged outside in society. To see their own business engaged in society means that we definitely attract better people. So there's a virtuous circle here. And I know there's a cynicism about why business is involved. I think successful 21st century companies are going to be those that are doing what the people on this panel are saying in terms of providing that leadership, working with governments, working with civil society, and that's what's going to move the world forward.
Yes, just a second. Mr. Zulik had a remark.
I was just going to, since my work takes me around the world, if there's one resource that I would emphasize that needs to be developed here by the private sector and also in connection with the public sector, it's the people of this region. You've got a youth bulge that everybody has talked about. You have an education system that really isn't training people for the 21st century. I was talking with the Prime Minister of Jordan, where he told me that now over half the university graduates in Jordan are women, but they can't really get into the workforce. There's some disconnects here. And I think that there's an opportunity for companies to be able to first work with the educational system to try to get a better sense of what analytical skills, training, other capabilities are necessary. Work with the government and also try to build better accountability into the educational system, build better standards, build better curriculum. That's in a self-interest at a corporate level, but it's also critical as a societal level. And I think that, this is a question that when I was with Saudi Aramco about 2 weeks ago, I was struck of all the places in Saudi Arabia they were talking about bringing in more women into their workforce. Now, Saudi Aramco is a very cutting-edge company. They recognize this need. But I think this question of the education system, its connection to employment, helping people make sure that you don't have some lost years there when you graduate school and you can't get in the workforce, you don't develop the habits, that will probably be the most critical thing for the future of this region. And that's something where you can have private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, education sector, and connect globally. And I'll just say that is different from what I see, for example, in East Asia. In East Asia, people have now focused on that issue. There are some lessons here that people can learn from other regions.
Mr. Naqvi.
I actually wanted to talk to the point made by Mr. Isdell about cynicism, about why companies invest. And I think it should be addressed and hit on the head. There's a lot of comments that one hears, especially in this region, that it is the socially acceptable and fashionable thing to be doing right now. It's as you started off. And let's just be completely honest. Companies are looking at this more and more aggressively because there is a corporate self-enlightened interest that is involved here. And to me, it really doesn't matter whether someone does it because they're taking the view that they're foregoing short-term profit for longer-term gain, or whether somebody says, the more I do of this, the more I will get noticed and the more I'll be able to make a tangible difference. The reality is that we need more and more businesses to do it. I think it's too early in the game to be sitting there and judging as to what the motivations of different pressure groups or aspects are. We heard conversations around education. Now, I can tell you, we look on, as a business, we look on education and healthcare as being basic infrastructure needs. If you look in the West, and somebody uses the word infrastructure, they usually mean roads, bridges, highways, and power plants. Well, infrastructure is whatever level of investment can help a country or a region go to its next level of development. And we, in our part of the world, are completely and woefully inadequately prepared for the future when it comes to education and things like healthcare. Now, as an investor in education, I can tell you that everybody seems to be focused, and I've heard people here on this panel as well, talking about universities and primary schools. And I come from the school of thought that says it's not enough to just send them to schools and teach them about geography and history and literature. We need to create more and more vocational schools in this part of the world, because we have an incredible mismatch that is coming up between the needs of the population and what government defines as priorities and the people that are being generated out into the workforce. So if you are an investor in education and you want to have the capability to make a difference, you make the profits through operating the schools, but you can plow a lot of that back into simple things like teacher training academies, vocational schools, and so on, which will have an incredible, immediate, beneficial impact on society.
Mr. Ghandour, he mentioned the issue of priorities.
He addressed the issues, but I'd like to say a couple of things and maybe have a call of action for action here in terms of not only talking about the necessity of having vocational schools. It is very essential, but the public-private partnership needs to move beyond something good that we need to talk about to an institutionalized process of having the public sector embracing the private sector and the private sector saying, yes, we want to be embraced.
How do you suggest this can be done?
And we come out, and specifically in education, because the biggest challenge today, one of the biggest challenges today is you call it youth bulge, I say the youth opportunity. 100 million jobs by 2020 in the Arab world. How do you create them? McKinsey did a study, by the way, recently among 400 companies of university graduates about their skills. They found that 63% lacked capabilities of problem solving, 57% lacked practical skills, 48% lacked written communication skills. These are university graduates. 48% lacked people management, obviously, and 47% didn't understand what the concept of teamwork was. So having the private sector to be an integral, institutionalized part of how our public sector educates our kids is essential. And this requires the public sector to say, yes, we want to do that. I mean, we are ready. The private sector is ready. In Singapore today, they are involved in putting together the future curriculum for life sciences, because Singapore thinks that the future is in life sciences. So they have brought in all the companies that are in life sciences and told them, come, we want to be in the future 10, 15 years down the road in life sciences. What do we teach our kids? That's what the Arab ministries of education and prime ministers need to tell us. Come over, what is it that you require, what skills do you require for these kids, and let's put together the curriculum, let's invest together, and let's probably have private sector management of public sector institutions that are in education.
But it's not being done. This is the issue.
But that's what I'm saying, it needs to be done.
Well, let us take it further ahead. I think it's important to see that there is an encouraging sign, definitely. What we're hearing from Arab businesses today is very encouraging, and I think we need to take it further ahead, because what we're saying is, yes, we do care, but we need to do something more about it, and to do it in a framework in which the government sort of provides some sort of support. And I agree. I'm not saying that the individuality of it should be taken away. It should still be up to the companies to come up with whatever they want. And to answer your question, I can assure you the Egyptian government will always be very receptive and giving the credit to anybody who would do that. But also, I think there is a need to have a collective effort here. There is an idea floating around, for example, in Egypt, to put together a social fund that is created and run by private companies or private equities, maybe more than one, maybe sectoral, maybe geographical. But I think these ideas need to be addressed more and need to be seen more and need to be supported by the governments as well in many ways, whether to provide them with some of the social objectives that need to be done, whether it's in education, health, infrastructure, or whatever, or by providing them just by the umbrella of support that is needed for them to do that work.
Can I please?
Yes.
I really want to say something slightly provocative, Mr. Prime Minister, which is that, you know, the great thing about Arab governments in this region is that we're hearing all the right noises coming out. But this is a new field, this is a new area, and although I respect very strongly national sovereignty and control over issues, this really is one area where all governments across this region can take a very unified perspective. And to use a very, very small example, in education, Egypt as a country is a country where, although a lot of opportunity is growing in domestically into the markets, a lot of people from Egypt are going and working in other parts of the world. Now, when I talk to your counterparts in the GCC, what I'm saying to them is, why don't you set up vocational schools in Egypt so that you can create the groundswell right there domestically of getting skilled labor in, trained at source, which will have a knock-on impact across that economy. So if you and your counterparts were to take a very unified position and actually forget about national issues and a specific social fund just in Egypt, I think this is one area where we can really drive home the whole concept of the integration of Arab thinking.
Well, I have some good news for you. It started to happen.
Hallelujah.
We have the first vocational training center built by His Excellency Sultan of Sharqa here in the 6th of October. So I believe it's starting to happen. And he had his reasoning, the exact reasoning that they said. If I'm going to get skilled Egyptians to work in my country, why don't you train them in our own country before bringing them in? I think it's a very good idea. These are the kinds of things. That's why I'm saying there are very encouraging signs. But let's take it one step ahead.
Before we end this panel, because our time is running, what we have seen so far is that the social issues, education primarily, is at the top of the agenda of any company that wants to be engaged in doing more than their main line of business. Going back to the article that you mentioned of Mr. Schwab, he puts, as you said, 5 levels of engagement. The first being corporate governance, the basic level, and then philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, and then he goes on to CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, and then he says in order to be really engaged and become a global corporate citizen, you have to care about the global issues as in poverty, as in water shortage, management of resources. Coca-Cola is doing that. It's an example of a global corporate citizen in that it engages with governments, like the initiative you have in Egypt for the management of resources. Do you think that this is possible for any Arab company, given their priorities? They are talking that we have basic needs at the level of education. So how can you go that step further to take care of the environment, for example?
Well, I think I made the point that obviously the prioritization has to be different in different parts of the world because the needs are different, the societies are different. So you've seen education come up as the major issue. But I don't believe that that then excludes the environment because I think that you're seeing mechanisms which actually can be funded by private equity in terms of what can be done with the environment. I think the Prime Minister's example here in Sharm el-Sheikh is one. I was down in Masa Alam. We are involved in a solid waste recovery program down there, which is actually self-funding. It creates work. It reduces by 80% the amount of waste that goes to the fill. And the output of that has got a commercial benefit that actually pays the people who are there. So these models are there. So I think both can be done at the same time. The education one is more difficult because that's very long term in terms of the outcome and very broadly spread. And obviously the need is the greatest. But I think there are commercial models in the environmental area that can be made to work as well, which means you can do both at the same time.
Are you willing as an international company to partner with local companies, not local because our companies, a lot of them have become global, but is there any form of partnership with private companies?
We do, and don't forget, our bottlers around the world, a lot of them are actually citizens of the countries in which we operate. We work on a franchise system. So this is where I come back to being engaged in local communities. Unless we're a functioning part of every society in which we operate, we will fail. And that clearly means a level of cultural adaptation and a level of engagement which we haven't reached yet. We're not at the level we need to be. No business has got there. But I think that level of engagement is the way forward in this new century. That's really what I'm advocating.
Mr. Zulik, when I was mentioning the topic of this panel to one of my friends, the first reaction he had, well, come on, the Arab world is the biggest producer of oil and petrochemicals in the world. Don't you think there's a conflict of interest between the Arab world wanting to be environmentally conscious and it being the biggest producer of petrochemicals, which is the basic resource in the plastics business, in making plastics? So do you think here there's a conflict of interest, or on the contrary, you see, for example, that in the world the biggest socially responsible companies are oil companies because they have to work on their branding and their image. So how do you see that in the Arab world?
Well, I don't see many people in the world wanting the region to pump less oil. So I think the reality comes down to how the oil companies or the region itself decides to use its natural resources. So let me give you an example. Many oil producers used to flare gas. Gas flaring adds tremendously to the carbon in the atmosphere. It can be economically sound to be able to capture the gas, and it also is environmentally beneficial. So that's one starting point. We've talked about other resources in the region and the fragility here, particularly in terms of water and some of the other aspects. So it would certainly make sense to be able to move in that direction. There's actually some huge potential here for some renewable energy. There's some great possibilities in terms of solar and perhaps in wind. So I think it would make sense not for people to try to drop the activities that are part of the international economy, but to expand the vision. And of course, then one can go to the other things we talked about. Some of the energy companies in this region are really international leaders in terms of their technology. Well, they can also be international leaders in terms of some of the other things we've talked about, people in the workforce, connecting in education. And so I think the question is not to try to shut down what exists. I think the question is to be able to complement it and broaden your frame of vision.
I think it's time for closing remarks. If you would like to have Mr. Shaya to conclude this panel, what would you like to see happen in terms of perhaps backing from the government or from NGOs, or how do you see this evolving in the
I think I'm very optimistic into a partnership between government, NGOs, and private business, and to get into an agenda of investment primarily in the roots. In my opinion, it starts with education. It starts with vocational training and doing the initiatives that help people improve their welfare and understanding of the challenges that we face in the future of pollution, of poverty, all starts with a better education. We have people who are dropouts teaching our children. We don't pay well for teachers.
Mr. Ghandour mentioned the McKinsey study. Actually, it says also an alarming piece of information. It says that the teachers in the world, instead of being the best of their class, they are of the worst 25% of their class.
Exactly, and we have to reverse this.
Mr. Ghandour.
Yeah, and the teachers have to become, the job has to become as valuable as it is because they're teaching our kids. And is there anything more valuable in our lives than our children? So are we going to give our children to teachers who are at the bottom of the class or who think that their job is the most important job in the world? That is a critical element in it. But I'll move on just to, in my concluding remarks, I have a couple of points. One, to say that there is something called the Arab Sustainability Leadership Group that was just launched at the GRI, which is the benchmark organization that audits
Global Reporting Initiative.
Yes, there are 20 companies from the Arab world. This is the first time that you had more than one company going to of the Arab world, and Her Majesty Queen Rania was the keynote speaker. Imagine an Arab leader speaking at such an important, which means the Arab world is paying attention to this. The second item I would like to add here is when we talk about youth and what Arif talked about in terms of infrastructure, it doesn't necessarily need to be hard as much as the Arab world is in love with buildings and hard assets. What I've talked about last year is that the infrastructure of the mind is as essential in investment as it is in building buildings, in fact much more important. So we need to work with the public sector on how to create partnerships for investing in the human mind.
Mr. Zulik. Quick remarks.
Well, I and others have emphasized the criticality of people, so I won't dwell on that. I'll just maybe add one supplementary point that Neville mentioned, but I think is worth drawing out. It's natural, whether you're running a government institution, a multilateral public institution, a private institution, that sometimes you do the best you can, but there's a role for a civil society and a more open civil society and a press to constantly be challenging. It's often not easy. Sometimes the things that you publish are wrong. Sometimes they make life difficult, but in the end, it's a good safety valve and way to make sure that people are identifying these topics. So I think the one thing I would add, as Neville mentioned, is that trying to create an environment for more civil society groups to operate and a freer discussion would probably encourage the development of all the things we've talked about.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, I believe that what is needed today is to take this further by a collective effort between government and business. And the government of Egypt has 2 months ago set up a joint committee between the government and business associations to put together a framework for corporate social responsibility in Egypt. And I encourage other governments to do the same.
Of course. Mr. Isdal.
Just to say that this is not easy. It is complex, it is difficult. We keep looking for simple solutions to complex problems. They don't exist. And it is going to take leadership from the leaders in this room, the leaders who are not here, to work together, and I talk about the triangle, to come up with the solutions. Because if it were simple, we'd have solved the problems already.
Mr. Naqvi.
The world is going to see some new industries coming up in the next few years, whether it's in alternative energy, whether it's in clean transport, whether it's in sustainable cities. The list goes on and on. We're going to witness a new paradigm shift in terms of what is out there in which we can invest and make money. The region has a lot of liquidity. I think this region can take the lead in investing in areas that are both sustainable, socially acceptable, and it doesn't matter whether people in the audience out there are investors or entrepreneurs. The opportunity to be a social investor and a social entrepreneur is actually identical to the opportunity of just going out and seeking profit. I encourage more people to think about it.
You ended with the issue of entrepreneurs. I ask all of you, I thank you first for being on this panel. I ask you to stay seated because, and please the audience also, because we're going to introduce now 2 entrepreneurship awards. It is estimated that the Middle East and North Africa region needs to create, as Mr. Alshaya yesterday said, between up to 100 million jobs by 2020 to meet the challenge of providing employment for its growing young population. To do that, we need a dynamic private sector that can drive growth and with it an entrepreneurial spirit that not only sparks innovation but also has a high job creation possibility, especially in emerging markets. I ask the Minister of Trade and Industry of Egypt, His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Rashid, to please take the stage to announce the Industry Business Plan Competition Awards in Egypt, مشروعك حقيقة.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I'm very pleased today to be presenting here the awards to the deserving winners of Mashru'ak Haqiqa competition. It is a very special occasion indeed because we have always been advocating for the importance of entrepreneurship and creativity. Mashru'ak Haqiqa competition is the first of its kind in the industry sector, conducted on a nationwide basis targeting high growth entrepreneurs, genuine ideas and job creation, with objectives focused around culture building, stimulating innovation, encouraging SME startups, launching industry-related services sector, and developing overall skills of future industrialists. The Industry Business Plan Competition, Mashru'ak Haqiqa, or Make Your Project a Reality, is part of an Egyptian entrepreneurship development program, an integrated public-private partnership initiative that addresses the overall development of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in Egypt. Executing this business plan competition within a public-private partnership format in partnership with NGOs like Egyptian Junior Business Association and the UAE Arab Science and Technology Foundation has been strategic for the ministry in implementing a wide range of its projects. We received approximately 2,000 applicants from all over the country, representing various age groups, educational and cultural backgrounds, and surprisingly discovered a great deal of innovative and sound project ideas that could have significant impact on the overall development of the Egyptian industry in the near future. The success story behind this competition will reinforce our vision and will help us to further extend cross borders to create synergies and joint success stories on a regional basis. We aim to fulfill our vision for a strong, developed Egypt. We are investing in our people, our biggest asset, but we are not alone in such endeavor. We have the strong support and partnership of the private sector. Not only this, but we rely on today's winners and other Egyptian entrepreneurs with the right mindset and will support the change to set an example for others to follow. In the name of the entrepreneurial spirit we are talking about, let me introduce with great pleasure the 2 winners of our competition. In the second place, we have Mr. Tariq Helmi with his project under the title The Biofiber Company. Biofiber Company plans to exploit Egypt's biggest competitive advantage in its best advantage to invade not only the local but the international market by producing and encouraging the use of biofibers. So I'd like to invite here Mr. Tariq Helmi. In the first place, the winner is Dr. George Messiha with his project under the title Jetic Inks. Jetic has engineered and experimented a high-quality formula with very competitive pricing and the advantage of being the only manufacturer in the Middle East for special inks. Jetic Inks will provide the market with 2 main products: solvent-based inks for inkjet outdoor printing and flush cleaning fluid used by customers to ensure clean printing heads. So our first prize winner, Dr. George Masiha. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid, and congratulations for the winners. Thank you. In the previous session, we established that success is not complete if it does not carry with it social responsibility that aims to give back to the community, the society, and the environment. Our next award honors a different kind of entrepreneurship. It is as innovative and effective, but serves a social cause. I asked Mrs. Hilda Schwab, chairperson and co-founder of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, to take the stage. These awards are given by the Schwab Foundation and also the Arab Business Council. So I asked the chair of the Arab Business Council, Mr. Brahim Dabdoub, who is also the CEO of the National Bank of Kuwait, to take the stage.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Minister Rashid has just presented us with success stories in entrepreneurship in industry. The next minutes are about less well-known success stories in social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurs are a vital and essential part of society. Their primary motivation is to find pragmatic, innovative solutions to social problems. Often, they can revolutionize entire industries or create systemic change. Their organizations have a direct social impact to improve the fate of millions of people who would otherwise be excluded from the marketplace and the benefits of economic development. To promote these people and their new models of sustainable change, social change, Klaus Schwab and I have created and endowed an organization, a new organization in 1998, the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. During the last decade, the foundation has been looking for the best role models in order to highlight their work and give them access to global and regional decision makers through the World Economic Forum. We have created a network of over 140 social entrepreneurs worldwide, and in cooperation with media and other partners, we select the Social Entrepreneur of the Year in over 25 countries. It is with great pleasure now that I can announce a new partnership in the region with the Arab Business Council, and I would like to ask Mr. Dabdoub to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Schwab. On behalf of the Arab Business Council, I'm pleased to take part in this ceremony and stress our interest in building on the work of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship and the World Economic Forum by championing the Social Entrepreneur of the Year award in the Arab world. We also hope to take it beyond Jordan and Egypt to all the Arab world. The ABC is a community of the World Economic Forum dedicated to elaborating possible solutions to emerging issues, in particular those affecting the Arab Business Council. Currently, our focus is to endorse three major issues: corporate engagement in society, privatization, and the role of business in education reform. Social entrepreneurship is not a new concept in the region, nor for this matter in the history of humanity, though the term may be fairly novel to some. I'm sure that there are many in the Arab world nowadays who fit the profile of a social entrepreneur. It is our hope to be able to identify them and to support them as best as we can. We thank the Schwab Foundation and the Forum for the work they have done and continue to do, and hope that we can collaborate with them in the coming years in support of this initiative. Thank you very much.
I'm delighted now to announce the winners of the Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award for 2008 from Jordan and from Egypt. First from Jordan, I would like to ask Zainab Al-Momani to join me on stage. Zainab is the founder of the Sakra Women's Cooperative. The Sakra Women's Cooperative promotes the economic, social and cultural rights of women in the remote and rural areas of Jordan while operating as a successful for-profit cooperative. Its women members cultivate, manufacture, package and market the cooperative's products and share in the profits while their children are in childcare program or benefit from school and university grants given by the group. Congratulations. Please stay. From Egypt, we have 4 outstanding finalists who are among us today. Iman Bibars, Association for the Development and Enhancement of Women, Rakda El-Ebrashi, Association for Sustainable Development, Magda Iskander, Care with Love, and Sherif El-Kamrawi, Hemaya and Basata Ecolodge. The jury in Egypt has met last week and has chosen the winner, who is, he doesn't know yet, who is Sherif El-Kamrawi. Sherif Al-Kamrawi is the founder of 2 complementary organizations, Hemaya and Basata Ecolodge. And you will see that the Prime Minister has talked already about solid waste management. That's what he is doing, among other things. Mr. Kamrawi has fought relentlessly for the sustainability and conservation of Egypt's natural resources on land and sea. Basata pioneered the first ecolodge in Egypt, establishing South Sinai and the Gulf of Aqaba as an ecotourism destination. With the large-scale development that followed, Hemaya was created to deal with waste management on 150 kilometers of coastline with marine and reef protection patrols and empowering local communities to run these programs. I congratulate all the finalists and the winners for their outstanding contribution to society.
I thank everybody here, and please, I ask the panelists for a collective photo with Mr. Dabdoub and Mrs. Schwab, and the winners, please, to the stage, and Mr. Rashid.
Thank you very much.
All the issues, man. Cool.
See you.
الو لا ولا هم لا ولا هم